The next interview is with David Lesser, and David is a bookseller from Connecticut. And David, tell us a little bit about your background, family, schools, where you grew up, etc.
Grew up in Washington. My father was a New Deal guy. He was a doctor who spent his career at the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Went to public schools in D.C., went to Amherst College, Yale Law School, was a lawyer in New Haven, full blast for about 20-plus years, starting out at New Haven Legal Assistance Association for 5 years, my 5 best years. And then private practice for 15 or so years. Got married right after college, 2 kids, 2 boys, 2 grands who live in Philadelphia and D.C.
Okay. Naturally, the question would be, since you were a lawyer, what attracted you to the book business?
I was always interested in American history, and I was an American Studies major at college. Kept reading in American history for recreation. The law work that I did that most interested me was work that had to do with several of the more significant constitutional amendments, the ones that were passed right after the Civil War, and I had some cases that involved those. And so I spent a lot of time reading about slavery and the response of the courts to slavery before the Civil War, and then the history of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution after the Civil War. And that was what appealed to me, what came to appeal to me as I got to dislike the law practice by the mid-'80s, about the book business, that there were plenty of books and pamphlets about those issues that a lot of people, most people in the book business didn't seem to have an awareness of their significance.
Right.
And so I felt, being not entirely a risk-averse person, but certainly not willing to take large risks, I thought that if I started buying in those areas, that I would be able to, by explaining what these books and pamphlets were, I would be able to create value that was not there before, and so be able to catalog them. I enjoyed researching them. I enjoyed writing about them. Research and writing had always been what I liked most about the law. And I liked explaining them. I liked selling them. I liked buying. I liked researching and cataloging, and I liked selling.
A typical bookseller.
Yeah. I like the whole business.
For those of you who have never seen one of David's lists, you should. He does fabulous notes and explains to you why you should be buying this book that he has at the price that he has it. And that's what bookselling should be about for everybody, not just for David. Dave, you're like about 20-odd years into the trade.
About 20.
About
15
20.
full-time.
Okay. The attraction to the book business is obviously what you've just mentioned, but what are some of your fond recollections of your early years in the trade? Who were some of the people who mentored you or who you looked to for advice, etc.?
Well, you were one of the people. Well, you were my main sponsor
That's
for
true.
ABAA.
That's true.
And I liked going to your place, and I liked what you told me, advice. One of my most enjoyable memories of a book transaction is I went to Matthew Needle's place at his suggestion, and I bought 300 volumes of a serial set, fully bound, for $10 a volume.
That sounds good.
And I spent months disbinding, cataloging, researching, learning all about Western Americana and maps. Really,
it's an education.
It made me realize that one of the great things our government has done is to keep a record.
Yeah.
And the Record has some fantastic reports and messages and that kind of thing. You could really get the whole scope of American history from those.
The government documents.
And it made for quite a thriving business for me in those early years in 1990, 91, 92, 93. Now on the internet, these things are common as dirt.
Really?
But then they weren't. And
Which segues into the next question of what is your presence on the internet? What percentage of your business do you do on the internet? How is your transition onto the internet, and how do you feel about the internet? Is it a blessing or is it a terrible thing?
well, I have about 8,500 books on the internet. I do as much on the internet as I'm able to. I'm on the Advanced Book Exchange and ABE and ILAB, Bibliopolis or Biblio, whatever it's called.
Yeah, these days.
So I take full advantage of the opportunity to be on the internet. The only books that I do not put on the internet are books that are going into my next catalog. And I wait about a week after that catalog has come out before I put
Them back on.
those
Give your
books.
customers first shot.
Yeah,
Really
yeah,
is.
yeah. And also there's a vanity press angle to it. You know, you don't want to lose your prize book that will be permanently in type in your catalog to someone and then go the way of all ephemera.
How many catalogs have you issued?
I have number 111 coming out next week.
That's a lot of catalogs.
Yep, I try to get one out every 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And it is a mixed blessing. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes it, I'm not even sure anymore it makes it easier to sell because there's such an overload now of stuff on the internet that I find that I can put out little lists of things I cataloged 15 years ago, and I'll sell 20 to 25% of those. They've been on the internet for 10 or 15 years.
And they haven't been bought.
And they
that
haven't
way.
sold, yeah. Obviously, the thing about the internet that I think affects us most as booksellers is that the book business becomes increasingly a market. Nobody would think on the stock market of if I owned a share of IBM, I would never think of going to you and saying, Mike, you're an expert on IBM. Why don't you take this share and sell it? Because there's a standard market for it. But in the book business, that's really exactly what we do. I don't know anything about Mark Twain, Mike. You're an expert in it. You take this book and sell it and send me half of whatever you get.
Well, Pope's Bridge Architecture.
But you know what I mean, that the advantage of expertise is diminishing as markets become standardized. Mm-hmm. And this, I think, explains the push in the business among us dealers to get unique items.
Well, that certainly sounds pretty logical today. If you were entering the book trade today, how would you do it?
I'm not
Or
sure.
would you do it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think people should do what they love to do, period. And if it doesn't work, well, they tried. Mm. So I don't know exactly how I would do it. And one of the reasons I say that is that really looking back, I don't know exactly how I did it. I heard Phil McBlain, my predecessor at this interview, say that he thought it would be a good thing for new people to work for somebody else for a while. I never did that.
No.
And I thought I was completely self-taught except for advice I would pick up along the way from you or Bill Reese or Clarence or Zinman or some other dealers, helpful dealers. And I really doubt that that's the best or most efficient way to do it, but you really should just figure out what it is that you love to do and then try to do it.
Give it a shot, huh?
Yep.
What do you see as the greatest challenges facing the book trade as we look forward into the future?
I'm really not sure. I've heard a lot of these stories about how people don't buy books to read anymore. They buy them as things. But I think people always bought books as things. When pocketbooks started coming out, and you could buy a Penguin edition of Moby Dick, people still wanted to buy the first edition of Moby Dick, and the price for that has gone up.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I do think that the standardization of markets has already affected the business of a lot of people, and it will continue to affect it. And in our friends who like to do first editions, modern firsts, all fancy themselves as literary critics, and if they thought a particular book was great, boom, $10,000. And then you can go on the internet and you see books, the same book, for multiples smaller than that. So there's a lot of adjusting that people will have to do, and I don't know how the adjustments will be made or what exactly the adjustments are, but there are lots of changes coming, and there's lots of winnowing and sorting out that's going to happen. I'm sure people have talked with you about the decline of the open shop, the decline in attractiveness for purchasers of what used to be staples for purchase, regular books. So all we can say is things will continue to change exponentially.
When I first started in the trade, there were open bookshops everywhere.
Yes.
Every place you could go, there was somebody had an open bookshop.
And when I started, there were still a lot of open shops. And I remember with great pleasure a trip across the country, stopping in book places in Chicago, Springfield, Illinois, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Kansas.
I know there's a bookseller there.
Who is it?
I can't remember.
I forget.
The name, but...
And then New Mexico and Southern California. These places are not there anymore. And it's a little awkward always, I think, to call people for an appointment because it's a special thing and you have to sort of feel you have to buy something. You can't just go in and see you later, Charlie.
There's a certain kind of bookseller etiquette that one has to observe from time to time.
Yes.
At least those of us who've been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
What's your best remembrance of a book find, and what was your biggest disappointment?
Well, I'd rather not say my best remembrance of a book find because I don't want somebody else, a dealer in the trade much longer than I, wouldn't want anybody else to feel bad. If I'm dealing with a civilian, of course, it's another story. I always try to be fair. But if somebody is a dealer and sets out a price, that's the price.
Yeah.
I think my biggest disappointment is finding that occasional thing that looks wonderful and then it turns out to be defective.
Yeah. Or finding that book that you've never seen before and coming home and finding there were 8 copies.
Oh, there's always that. Sometimes it's 20. 20.
Half the price of what you just paid.
Yeah.
You said, oh my God.
I know.
There are, historically speaking, there have been great booksellers in every era. Who do you think are the great booksellers of our day, and who are some of the younger people who may be the rising stars of the trade, in your opinion?
Well, for me, I think it's easy in the Americana field. I think our colleague and friend Bill Reese stands head and shoulders over everybody. I remember going on a couple of vacations when I was just learning and bringing some of his catalogs to read. This was well before he got to 100, I guess. And Bill, he knows his history. He knows American culture. He writes very well. He not only knows all of those things, but he knows the history of the particular book in commerce over many years. It's quite impressive.
It is.
And he
Right.
keeps a lot of it in his head. I think I'm too old now to keep it in my head.
Well, he's getting up in years now.
Well, he's always going to be younger than me.
Me too. I think he's 54.
And I'd say Michael Zinman, who really taught me quite a bit, not so much in terms of particular